Welcome to another edition of Valley Newsline. Hello, I'm your host, Ron Whitlock. Thanks for tuning in. The presidential election cycle already beginning across the United States. Has it begun here in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas and on the border region? Well, it has on this program effective today. Many of you have been watching presidential debates both on YouTube, on ABC, and other media outlets across the United States of America, both Republican and Democratic. Our guest in the program today is Sam Freeman, Associate Professor of Political Science, UTPA. Sam, welcome back to Valley Newsline, along with Aaron Pena, State Representative, District 40. We have asked both gentlemen to review all of the policy statements made and other kinds of news coverage of the statements made by mainly the Democratic candidates as to what they've said, how what they've said relates to border issues, predominantly in the Lone Star State of Texas, Brownsville to El Paso, a predominant Democratic, predominant Hispanic region of the United States of America. Based on the Democratic candidates' guides that are currently running and what they, and those, some will fall off obviously as the primaries go through their procedures and processes and elimination. That's what it's all about. What do each of you think, based on what they're saying today, that South Texas and border people should pay attention to, and who should get their vote if the vote was being given to one of those candidates today? Sam?
Well, certainly one of the key issues is the wall. In addition to that, health care is a very important problem within the valley. The war, amazingly or interestingly, affects the valley in a lot of different ways. So certainly those three things.
And we do want to focus on those three, Aaron, along with immigration. Those three areas predominantly, those are 3 and 4 of the predominant things that we're trying to focus on here on Valley Newsline. So on the basis of those 4 critical areas, as it relates to the border region, who would you vote for today? Who do you think the people along this region should vote for or take a real close look at based on where they stand today?
In terms of their records and the policies that they are advocating, the 2 best candidates in terms of the valley are Governor Bill Richardson and Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Between those 2, it's really pretty much of a toss-up, but I would, in terms of the valley issues and border issues, I would probably go with Bill Richardson as a consequence of his direct experience and familiarity with the border.
Aaron, a governor of a border state, New Mexico, borders on Mexico. He understands the region. He is Mexican American. He is a CEO. We've not elected anyone directly out of the Senate since JFK, so that doesn't happen very often. But Hillary, whom I know you've already endorsed, is somewhat experienced by virtue of the fact she was First Lady for 8 years. There has to be an element of awareness and learning by virtue of living in the White House for an 8-year period and being the First Lady and the wife of the President of the United States, Bill Clinton.
Right. When it comes to issues that concern us here on the border, I think, as I've stated, I think Hillary Clinton is the candidate that people ought to be supporting. One, because she's going to win the primary. Richardson, who I'm very comfortable with the positions he's taken with regards to issues that we care about, would make a fine Secretary of State. I think Hillary Clinton would find him as a nice complement to his cabinet. But the reality is, for us here on the border, we want to have somebody who pays attention to our community and to our issues. Without a doubt, Richardson knows the issues because he's from the border. Many of us know Governor Richardson personally. There are people who I know from Texas who've worked with him when he was in the Energy Department under the Clinton administration. But the same is true for Hillary Clinton. Matter of fact, Hillary Clinton has a number of ties to this area, and I would hope that she, being a pragmatist, would listen to the voice of South Texas. And like Richardson, she also has a number of people who've worked in her administration, at least her husband's administration, who certainly should have the ear of the president, and hopefully she'd listen to those issues. But to recap, I think Richardson and Clinton are the two Democratic candidates that best match up with the border, in my opinion.
We will be sharing with you during the telecast some of the exclusive information that we have both from the Hillary Clinton campaign via email after I ran into her the last time she was in South Texas as part of a fundraising venture for her senatorial campaign for New York, and also a one-on-one exclusive interview we had with Governor Bill Richardson. But before we do that, we want to talk in terms of the border wall, which seems to be the most significant issue that's getting all the media attention, and it's got the whole border region up in arms and really irate at this particular point in time by virtue of everyone in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and even in the presidential races not being really discussed other than Hillary voted for the wall, and she is saying she's in support of it. Barack Obama is in support of the wall, voted for the wall, and primarily the Republican candidate Giuliani also was on KURV recently on one of their programs saying he is certainly in support of building 700 miles of fencing along the U.S.-Mexico border. So on the basis of those three front runners being in favor of building a wall, where does that leave the border region?
Well, I think if you're talking about Hillary Clinton, the border, you can forget it. I don't think she's interested in the border at all. I don't think she'll be a friend of the border. She voted in favor of the wall. She voted in favor of the war, which has a huge negative impact on the valley. We're suffering over 2 times our proportion of the population dead relative to the rest of the nation. We've lost 0.7% of the casualties. We're less than 0.3% of the population. So the death rate, the war is extremely expensive for us in terms of the valley with respect to the infrastructure. We need to spend tens of millions of dollars on the levees, voting for the war, supporting the war, and Hillary Clinton will continue the war. She's made that very clear that she has no intention of ending the war. The very first people who spoke out against the war, Hillary Clinton was the very first Democrat to attack them, followed by Joe Biden. As Tucker Carlson said, Hillary Clinton is basically a Republican, and that's especially true in foreign policy. And if she's elected president, she basically will continue the foreign policy of George Bush.
Here, look him in the face there, and you endorsed Hillary. You've got to disagree with what Sam just said.
Well, let's all go back to September 11, 2001. Prior to that day, we were going about our daily lives, and then that day changed everything. And if we remember the way the citizenry felt at that time after that event, I think we all can say, based on the information that was given to us by the president, that we, at least a majority, supported some sort of effort to stem the terrorism that was coming to our country. And the votes that were taken by many of the members of Congress reflect that feeling in the citizenry. But I think without a doubt today, knowing all the information that we now have learned, that much of the information that we were initially given was not accurate, and that the war has been managed poorly, I think most people agree that this war ought to come to an end.
But Sam just said, irregardless of those facts, he says she will continue the war if elected president of the United States.
Well, the question is then how do we get out of this war? Okay?
You've endorsed Hillary Clinton. He said she'll continue the war. Do you disagree with what Sam just said?
I disagree that we should simply wipe our hands and walk away. We've got people there that we're going to leave at the mercy of these opposing forces. Like Vietnam, I would hate to see those images of helicopters leaving the top of buildings and where people are scrambling to get to safety. We cannot simply walk away. Now, that's an argument that could be taken. I think most of the American citizens don't want us to simply wash our hands of the area. It's going to follow us. So the question is, how do you address it? Do you simply walk away, or do you support the moderates in the region? Do you try to prop up people who will bring some stability to the area? These are very difficult questions. I'm merely a state representative, but what I do know is you just not simply wash your hands of the problem and walk away.
Now, we talked to Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico back in 2004. We talked to him about the concept that the Rio Grande River, all the way from Brownsville to El Paso, should be looked upon as an infrastructure that unites Mexico and the United States and the two peoples of both countries rather than divides them. Here's what he said. The mayor of Laredo in this program Saturday said that the Rio Grande is not a thing that divides us, it unifies us.
That's right. The Rio Grande is a unifier. It brings us water, it brings us economic development, it brings us unity. We should use the Rio Grande as a way to bring us closer together instead of separating us.
Based on what he told me in 2004, as though real surprised gentleman to understand that he's the only presidential candidate that I can research and find out is opposed to building the border wall along the natural barrier of the Rio Grande River. What do you think about that? Shouldn't you consider supporting him rather than Hillary? This man sitting next to you said that he needs to be looked upon, at least from the standpoint of immigration, being opposed to the wall, health care, and other issues that are important to your constituents, and maybe given a second look.
Well, I'm very pleased with the position he's taken on the wall. I think that's the position that most people along the border feel. There's no reason for us to interfere with our relationship with Mexico, business, cultural, or otherwise. The problem that Richardson faces is that he only has 3.9% in the polls, and although polls aren't everything, the final poll will probably reflect that he will not be the winner of the primary. And so, being a pragmatist, I want to work with the people who I expect are going to be the challengers for the presidency, and I believe that'll be Hillary Clinton.
But if in fact he is saying something that the border region and the voters of the border region feels is in their best interest, should they not, irrespective of how he stands in the polls, look at him for their financial support and for their encouragement of his presidential campaign aspirations?
Oh, without a doubt. Bill Richardson is a fine candidate. I think he clearly represents a large segment of the Democratic Party. I think most people in the Valley would be very comfortable with Bill Richardson. Most of us in the legislature know him. He's somewhat adopted the state of Texas. Most of the elected officials know him quite well. His problem, again, is that he's not likely to be the primary winner. That does not mean that he will not have a place in the administration if a Democrat should win the presidency. He was the Secretary of Energy under the Bill Clinton's administration.
I fully
suspect that's right, and I fully suspect that he would make a good vice presidential candidate, or at least Secretary of State, and most of us would be very happy to see him there.
We have a lot of problems in this nation, and the Valley certainly reflects a lot of those problems, more so perhaps than many other regions. We're the poorest region in the entire United States, and when we start supporting candidates who are the business as usual candidates, as Senator Clinton is, and to a very large extent Senator Obama is, then we're not going to see the problems facing this country addressed in any kind of serious manner. They're not going to be improved. They're going to continue to be exacerbated. They're going to continue to deteriorate. We need to have a major change of course in this country. We are not going to get that from Senator Clinton. We're not going to get that from Barack Obama. I do believe that we can get that from Governor Richardson, perhaps not to the extent that we would get it from Dennis Kucinich. When we talk about the immigration issue, we need to understand a couple of things. And by the way, Dennis Kucinich is also opposed to the wall and voted against the wall in Congress. But when we talk about the immigration problem,
thank you for pointing that out, Sam.
You're welcome. When we talk about the immigration problem, all of the candidates except one address only half the problem, and that half of the problem is controlling the borders and finding ways to reduce the undocumented immigration and what we're going to do, how we're going to deal with the undocumented people who are in the United States. There's only one candidate who is addressing the other half of the problem, and that is what produces this flow of people out of Mexico and Latin America into the United States, and that's Dennis Kucinich. He talks about the problems of NAFTA and how NAFTA have had a huge negative impact with respect to the economy of Mexico, and how that has tremendously increase the immigration from Mexico into the United States. He's the only one talking about economic revitalization of Latin America so that the economies of Latin America will grow and develop and will have less poverty, and in the process of that will have less need for people to immigrate to this country out of financial necessity. The only other person, well, I see two other candidates who express some empathy for those kinds of things, though they're not nearly as far down the road as Kucinich. And that, of course, is Governor Richardson and former Senator John Edwards. Those are the three that we really should be looking at, with the two primary ones being, again, Richardson and Kucinich, because I think they're the only ones that stand any possibility of giving us real change in this country, and that's what we have to have.
You want me to respond to that? Let me respond this way. The perfect should not be the enemy of the good. Let me say it one more time. The perfect should not be the enemy of the good. And by that, what I mean is, it is wonderful that we have principled politicians who take stands on issues. It's wonderful that that we have people who agree with us. But you're not going to get people who agree with you all the time. A president of the United States has to represent all the people, not a small segment of the population. And so you have conservatives and you have liberals, you have moderates. There are people who have varying opinions on the issue. And so, although we may find a candidate who perfectly matches our point of view, the candidate who's going to get elected, and in this case it'll be Hillary Clinton in the primary, is the person who has to balance the concerns of both elements or both polarized elements of the party. In the Democratic Party, we have a liberal wing, we have a centrist wing, and a conservative wing. And although Kucinich represents the liberal wing of the party, he's not going to win a general election against a Republican candidate like Giuliani or Fred Thompson. So you've got to find somebody who balances out those concerns, and so I think Hillary Clinton is that person.
Sam Freeman said that Hillary Clinton is not going to be good for the border region, even on health care. She did respond to our query to her press office after we talked to her at a private function here in the Rio Grande Valley. She did not have time for a personal interview that she's indicated she would agree to at a future time and date. We'll let you know when, in fact, that does happen. Employer-sponsored health coverage. Hillary has supported, based on this exclusive email, a proposal to enable small businesses to better afford to provide health insurance. A bill that allows small business to join in a one risk and purchasing pool, and under the bill that she is sponsoring and promoting, small businesses would be able to negotiate lower costs and employees would get better access to affordable choices to provide health care for their family. Tax credits would go to their employer. So she's indicated at least a willingness to try to get involved in getting some kind of health care from employer benefits. So, on the basis of this, you're telling me that Hillary's going to be elected, that's where you're coming down. Obama is not going to be elected, that's your position? Or what do you think? You think Obama has a chance at all?
If he wins the nomination, I think he stands a pretty good chance of being elected. Obviously, he and Senator Clinton both have some strong negatives going against them. Her gender, his race. Unfortunately, we're still a sexist nation and we're still a racist nation.
How does the border region, Brownsville to El Paso, an area where 700 miles of fence is going to be built, is being built by the current Bush Republican administration, how does this region get its voice heard by the individuals running for president of the United States by either party at this juncture?
By getting involved. I mean, one of the problems that we have is low voter turnout. I mean, if the people who are registered to vote simply voted, we'd have a larger say. We'd have an entirely different elected official grouping up in Austin. Our voting turnout has been abysmal. Involvement is the other issue. We talked
involvement involves also campaign contributions.
That's right.
And the only one that's come to town out of any of these has been Hillary Clinton, who came to get a big check when she was running for re-election of the Senate in New York, came back after she announced for the Democratic party for President of the United States. She's come back to get another campaign contribution. She's had neither time has she had public gatherings.
Unfortunately, over the last couple of election cycles, Texas has not been in play. I mean, it's been seen as a solidly Republican state. Now that's changing somewhat. And so Texas has been visited by politicians who are interested in raising funds. Don't get me wrong, that does have an effect. And you certainly, if by helping Richardson, can change the front runner's position on issues. But if you're not involved, you're not going to have a say at all.
During our interview with Governor Bill Richardson, he said he is in favor of 6-month parity for Mexican shoppers as compared to the 6 months that Canadians could come and shop in the United States of America. Would you be in favor of granting 6-month parity to Mexicans, just like we're granting now to Canadians?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's got to be parity, and so I would be supportive of that.
Our Mexican friends consider that discriminatory, by the way.
That's right, and you know, there shouldn't be this discrimination. And U.S. and Mexico and Corpus Christi and New Mexico and Mexico, we coexist, so issues like that bring us together, and we should treat Mexicans the same way as we do Canadians.
Bill Richardson, 6-month parity, his support of I-69 for South Texas, but you're telling us you don't think he can be electable. So at this point in time, why should individuals who you say, Sam, living along the border, looking at what Bill Richardson is saying on the main issues, war, immigration, wall, health care for the border region, why shouldn't they send a check to Bill Richardson's campaign? Just because you say she's winning in the polls and she's going to win?
No, actually, a donation to Bill Richardson would help the effort of his issues. If he has a better position on the question of the border wall or immigration, then helping Bill Richardson actually helps the eventual nominee, I believe, because it helps frame the argument. It forces the front runner to address the issues, and if the citizenry agrees, generally speaking, with the person who's made the best argument, then I believe that, generally speaking, those positions are adopted by the front runner so that they can get elected.
So we started with him saying Bill Richardson should be looked at to get support from the Rio Grande Valley. By the end of the program, you seem to be agreeing.
Well,
Aaron Pena.
You got to get involved. That's what I agree with.
Thank you for coming and talking to our audience and to me about this issue. The final word, New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, and why the concept of being united at the border rather than being divided by a wall. Bill Richardson with the last word. Till next Sunday, adios.
We should use the Rio Grande as a way to bring us closer together instead of separating us.